I'm going to talk you through A Bird Came Down the Walk by Emily Dickinson, pointing out some of the key features or aspects of this poem. Okay, one of the most interesting things to note in the first verse is that the speaker takes on the role of a hidden observer. And this is clearly stated from the second line. He did not know I saw. The speaker is hiding or out of sight, observing a bird from a distance. This gives a sort of scientific feel to the observation, and like she is investigating the characteristics of a bird, in exploring how it behaves and how it feels. The bird itself is anthropomorphized. In this section, through use of things like human characteristics. It's given a kind of human approach. It's doing very normal human things like walking down a road, drinking, eating. And this personal human quality is emphasised through the use of things like dynamic verbs, bit, drank, ate, very normal everyday activities. This makes it seem humanised. And through exploring these actions, the speaker tries to see how she should interpret the bird and therefore nature. And there's different attitudes towards nature expressed in the various components and verses of the poem. In the first verse in particular, it's possible to argue that a kind of negative attitude towards the bird is expressed. So, for example, talking about it biting something in half and eating a worm raw. This makes it seem quite violent, I suppose, and savage, and creates the idea that nature really is wild and dangerous. However, by the time we get to the second verse, we get a sort of different interpretation of the bird, a much more positive interpretation of the bird, and he actually becomes polite in his actions. So, for example, he hops to let the beetle pass. Hopping in itself is a kind of, I suppose, a more gentle, delicate, lively action than biting and eating things raw, and perhaps suggests that birds aren't sort of dangerous predators, but they can live in harmony and can coexist together with other aspects of nature. So we've gone from bird as dangerous, violent, savage in verse 1 to bird as a kind of courteous creature living alongside other aspects of nature in a non-threatening manner. Then in verse 3, another view of the bird and of nature is uncovered. He glanced with rapid eyes that hurried all around. They looked like frightened beads, I thought. So here the bird isn't aggressive like in the first verse, or polite like in the second verse. He seems more anxious. He seems vulnerable. And this is heightened through, again, the use of verbs, a technique that Dickinson uses a lot, when partly to anthropomorphise the bird, but also then to create a sense of its emotions. So glancing and hurrying increases the nervousness of the bird. So in this verse, the speaker seems to now mirror the feelings that the bird had in the previous verse. The speaker becomes cautious, like the bird was earlier when it was described as being frightened and glancing. She somehow feels a sense of danger from the bird, which seems a little extreme, but perhaps suggests that in trying to cross the divide between human and nature, observer and participant, there is an element of risk that she acknowledges. However, this doesn't go the way she hoped, and the bird flies away. He unrolled his feathers and rowed him softer home. The idea of rowing as a metaphor. It doesn't literally row, it flies through the air. But again, I think the use of this word row is to create an idea of easeful movement, that it's kind of elegant and controlled, in contrast perhaps to how the bird was when it was eating the worm earlier. The other thing to notice is that the speaker offers the bird a crumb. This is quite small, obviously, and humble offering. She doesn't have much to give it, but she tries giving him something. He rejects this, partly because he's just eaten a worm, but it shows again her lack of understanding, perhaps, her lack of ability to connect with nature and with the bird. He rejects it, he flies away. That rowing metaphor is carried on into the final verse, saying that he has wings like oars that divide the ocean. So again, a rowing metaphor. This rowing metaphor is then carried on and extended to a butterfly. And the bird is compared to a butterfly, something else that obviously also flies, in a kind of sort of elegant, calm manner. So again, we have the idea of it leaping plashless as they swim. So like the bird flies off silently, more silently than rowing, it also flies off in a quiet, graceful manner, like a butterfly. So we have quiet, graceful, and it's possible to argue a kind of magical sense enters this verse. The idea of silver, banks of noon, swimming, it creates this quite magical, beautiful imagery. You could argue that all this beautiful imagery heightens the gap between humans and nature. So the animals have this special magical world where it's all graceful, calm, beautiful, and the speaker, representing humans, cannot get involved in that world. She tries with her crumb but fails. She's not part of this sort of harmonic, beautiful environment. So to summarise the poem, there are some key elements to this poem. The main theme is obviously the relationship between people and nature. The speaker represents humanity, people, and the bird represents the world of nature. She explores the complexity of a bird's, I suppose, personality, for want of a better word, and life. she looks at how complex it is, what kind of emotions it has. And these are quite diverse emotions. But she also explores how the bird is existing in a kind of interconnected way with other elements of nature and other animals like the worms, the beetles, butterflies, etc. This further then shows the divide between people and nature. Nature lives in harmony with other elements of nature. People are kind of external observers. The speaker tries to cross this boundary. She tries to become interconnected with nature, but ultimately fails. And in this poem seems to strengthen the idea that these are two separate realms within the world, human, nature, and that you cannot truly become part of the natural world. The themes of the poem are represented through the structure of the poem. We have 5 verses, each with a different event happening in each of the verses. The first 3 verses seem to summarise 3 different views of nature. So verse 1 shows nature as wild and savage. Verse 2 contrasts by showing nature as sort of harmonious and courteous and respectful of each other. Verse 3 shows another aspect of nature as a vulnerable, frightened thing. Verse 4 allows the speaker to try and interact with this, and verse 5 reinforces the idea of nature as separate through the magical, beautiful imagery.